Good day, everyone. Scooter coming to you live from the Granville Guitars World Headquarters here in lovely St. Petersburg, Florida. Today is Tuesday, October the 27th, and we're continuing on with the final third in this trilogy of Fender Deluxe Reverb amps. And these are all covering different areas of the Fender evolution, if you will. The first one was a 73 Silverface. The second one was a 65, almost 66 Blackface. And then finally we're rounding it out here with this drip edge, 68, 69, that era of Silverface, which is the early Silverface stuff, the initial Silverface amplifiers. And the reason they're called drip edge is, let's get in here tighter. You can see, as opposed to the regular Silverface, which has no metal border around it, this has this metal, I don't know what you'd call that, border, I guess, frame. I would call it a frame, because it goes around the entire front of the thing. That's called a drip edge. For whatever reason. Other than that, cosmetically, it's pretty much identical to the Silverface. You'll notice, I don't know if you're going to see this when I zoom in here, the grill cloth has blue in it. That was abandoned later, but these with the drip edge will almost always have some blue threads in there. Yeah, there's a good tight shot. You can see the blue. And you can see the logo with the tail like it's supposed to have. Now the knobs, this is kind of interesting. By 68, the knobs were redesigned slightly from the 65. We talked about snowman knobs. The knobs on this amp, let me get up here closer. The knobs on this amp are not snowman knobs. The 8s were rounded off more so that there's a good shot right there. The 8s were more even on top and on bottom. Also, the set screw position was moved from being in front of the 10 on the dial to being in front of the 1 on the dial. This made it easier to install the knobs in the eyes of the guys at Fender at a certain point in manufacturing when they wanted to install them. Go figure, I don't know. Also, the plastic on these knobs, now one of them, the intensity knob, has been replaced. That's a modern repro there, which is very close to these knobs. The plastic on these knobs, as opposed to the Blackface knobs, is a lot smoother. You have to look at it closely, but the plastic on the Snowman knobs is kind of chalkier. So it's just a different manufacturing technique, I suppose, a different material or whatever. But if these are original knobs, that's what we got. Let's flip this guy around back and have a look. All right. First thing upon turning around, obviously you see that there's an enormous Electro Voice SRO magnet, large magnet speaker right there. And apparently this person, the owner, bought it used, and this speaker was already in there, so it's been in there a while. Adds a lot of weight to the amplifier and broadens the sound quite a bit. Gives you a little more clean headroom. It's a popular thing to do with the Deluxe Reverb. So popular that the reissue of these amps that Fender has put out and has been very popular for a number of years actually has a 100 watt speaker in it, the C12K, which just kind of broadens the tonal spectrum a little bit, which is good. So got your courtesy outlet down there, ground switch, fuse holder, power and standby switches, speaker and expansion speaker, all your pedal jacks and your reverb jacks, everything's in place. Serial numbers down there. I've already inspected the amp inside and out and given the repair estimate and everything. This guy's getting everything. It's getting an overhaul. It's getting all new tubes. It's getting all new filter caps, new AC cable. The same, basically the same routine that I've gone through with the other two Deluxes. So I just thought it would be interesting to compile these three together. That way we have kind of a document of some of the differences between the three, which are strikingly similar. The 73 silver, which was the first one I worked on, that's remarkably similar to a blackface. The only thing that's different really is how it's put together, with the slightly messier lead dress, owing to the wire that they had started to use. I am of the opinion that the reason why silver faces frequently look sloppier inside and the lead dress isn't as tight or as neat or clean is that wire, that thick plastic covered wire they were using. It didn't bend and hold its shape very well, as did the earlier single conductor wire, which has problems of its own. When I'm building amps from scratch, I use a wire that's closer to the thickness of the old cloth-covered wire, that bends and holds its shape real well, but it's actually a multi-strand wire that's pre-bonded, so you don't have to worry about tinning it or anything, and it actually behaves and moves and dresses like a solid core wire, but it gives you the advantages of the multi-core wire, which are numerous. So yeah, that's just kind of what they had to use at that point, and they were cranking out amplifiers by the hundreds. So anyway, let's have a look deep inside this little girl, shall we? Okay, before we get inside here, I thought we'd have a peek at a few of the other features of the cabinet. Tube label is here, which is a good thing. Production number is not there, and there's no numbered stamp or anything. That's pretty common by the time CBS took over. Some of this stuff got kind of lax. This amp has had previous work done to it, as you can imagine, with the replaced speaker. The reverb cables have been changed right there. The tank has been changed, and there's no bag present. Quite a bit of dust there. Apparently, the owner purchased this thing a long time ago and didn't pay much for it. But he's had it forever, and it's been sitting for a long time. And he just wants to get it back in shape. So that's what we're doing with this girl. Now, we're going to have a look inside. All right, here we are up in the guts of this thing. And you'll see that's had some work done to it quite some time ago. Right here, you'll see the tone stack. Well, let's start over here because they've both been monkeyed with. This is the tone stack capacitors for the normal channel. Now, I'm not entirely sure what in the hell was done here. Might have been an attempt to make more of a Marshall sound, but this is the original bass cap. This is a changed mid cap, and for some reason this is doing the duty of the treble cap right here. This big, it's a 0.1. So I'm not sure what they were going for there. A more mid-forward sound, I guess. That's got to be dealt with. Although, I may leave it and just see what it sounds like. And if it sounds cool, what the hell, we may just leave it alone. No sense pulling it out if it sounds cool. Down here you can see also this mid-range cap has been pulled, but the original treble cap is still in place. It's way up in there, that little guy right there. Hiding behind this wire. That little guy right there. I'm looking at the value. Yeah, 250 picofarad, which is what that's supposed to be. This is an 047 mid cap, which is not correct. So again, they were monkeying with the tone stack for whatever reason. You can see our original bypass capacitors. These electrodes here are in place, and those will be going bye-bye. They're already leaking. Well, not already, but they are leaking. As we look through this thing, you're going to notice this is transitional wire here. It's not the classic cloth-covered wire that we saw in the 65, 66 that I just did. But it is a single conductor wire, and it has a much more workable cloth covering. In other words, you can actually strip it with strippers. So a lot of times you'll see that it's been stripped rather than just pushed back. And you can do that because it's a much finer weave. The old stuff had a much coarser weave, and if you tried to strip it, it just went crazy everywhere on you and didn't really work out that well. Some of the wire, as I'm looking across here, has been replaced. The middle wire, I'll just scan up here. The middle wire on the, is that the intensity pot for the tremolo? I'm not sure. But the wire going to the wiper of, yeah, the intensity pot right here, that wire has been changed because that's a plastic coated, Teflon coated wire. Good wire. But that one's been changed for some reason, so at some point there was a problem with that wire. It's had a bunch of different work done to it. There are still some original things here. A lot of touched solder joints, so that means a lot of this stuff has been changed out at some point. I'm kind of thinking this bug was changed out because these solder joints don't look good at all. In this era, they still would have had pretty clean soldering work and good lead dress, things of that nature. You don't really see the more hasty work until you get well into the 70s. Even the early 70s stuff was still pretty clean and pretty nice. The so-called bright cap is there on the normal channel, even though it's not original, that little capacitor right there. But it's missing from the vibrato channel. So someone's pulled that. Some changes have been done to this thing to make it sound a little different and behave a little different. And I'm not going to just change those out pell-mell because the owner loved the sound of this amp back in, when he first bought it. So I'm going to leave a lot of that stuff, honestly, even though it's not correct. Some things I am going to do, though, as I'm looking here. You can see the corrosion on that screw right there in the center of the picture. That guy right there, all that corrosion on that, that's going to go away. You want to clean that stuff when you find it because it'll attract more corrosion. It's probably outgassing from one of these capacitors nearby, most likely this one. But that's the front end of the chassis. The majority of the pots look original. That intensity pot with the changed wire is definitely not original. It's a CTS. It's an older CTS. That work was done a long time ago, but that's not original. As we look up there towards the bias supply, we can see that bias supply capacitor. That's going to need to be replaced. And the resistor up in there looks a little crusty too. Actually, it's fairly clean. That's such a low voltage circuit that those 1 watt resistors they put in there typically just go, and you don't have to mess with them too much. Let me flip this thing around real quick here. Okay, now we're looking towards the back end. One other thing to make note of is you can see this chalky stuff all over the chassis. That's a zinc coating. That's what zinc does. It's a rust inhibitor. Earlier in the life of Fender amplifiers, these were nickel plated, these chassis, and you'll find that on a lot of earlier 60s chassis. My 64 Bandmaster is very nice and clean inside, and it's nickel plated. But later on they got into doing the zinc coating, which turns into kind of this chalkiness here. It's no big deal. It's just inhibiting rust, which is a bad thing. There are your preamp tubes there, reverb driver tube. Those are the jacks there for reverb switches, etc. Hang on. Okay, that's interesting. I didn't notice that at first blush. Someone has changed out the RCA plug for, this is the jack for the tremolo. Someone has put a 1/4-inch plug in there instead. Why on earth would you do that? I'm not sure. Folks, you see this kind of stuff all the time. You know, who knows? Maybe that jack was bad. You know, there was clearly some work done to the tremolo circuit itself, and you couldn't get a hold of the proper jack. We're living in a golden age. I try not to be too critical of old repairs, because at certain ages of doing what I do for a living, which is repairing amps, a lot of these parts were hard to get, if not impossible. You know, a lot of times you had to rob them from other amplifiers. Now we're in kind of an age where it's great, because all of these parts are readily available and not expensive. Well, as we come down here to the tubes, you can see we're still using the old cloth-covered wire, but it's the new version of the cloth-covered wire that I was talking about. And that's what we have throughout the amplifier. Now, let me see if I can get some light up in here a little bit better. Behind all of this wiring, there's a screen grid resistor right there, 470 ohms. Carbon comp. These take a lot of abuse over the years and don't age well as a result of being pounded. Also, tucked in underneath, you can see a 1.5K resistor that is used as a grid stopper, and that's going to get replaced too on both power tubes. And we're going to get new power tubes and a new power cable, etc. So a lot of the work that's going to get done to this amplifier is going to be of a similar nature to the other 2 amps that I've done in the last week. The other 2 deluxes I've done in the last week. Just maintenance, cleaning, that sort of stuff. Let's flip over to the other side of the chassis and have a look at the doghouse area and the transformers. Okay, here's what we find under the doghouse. This is an older repair using Illinois caps, and they're all leaking. Every single one of them. You can see they're getting kind of chalky at one end, and that's an indicator that they're getting ready to blow. They're sort of puffing out a little bit. They're quite old. Illinois caps are all right for, you know, a short-term thing, but for long-term fixes, we like to use much more expensive and better quality cap. And down here too, this is a pet peeve of mine right here. It's kind of like, why would you change the tires on a car and not do a spin balance? Why would you change out these caps and not replace these bridging resistors? I don't get that. They take a lot of abuse. Just change them out. It's no big deal. You gotta open up that solder joint anyway. Just change them out. You know, it's not a big deal. And it's probably me just picking nits. So anyway, now here we go over here. A lot of times, and I did this myself, every time you see a drip edge, you go, oh, it's a 68. No, it's a 68. Well, not always. My own Drip Edge Pro reverb amplifier is a 69. And I have seen drip edges that were 67s. So late 67 is usually when you're going to see it. There is our power transformer. 6068, 28th week. So, you know, mid summertime of 68. CSA tested, has to do with being able to go into Canada, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. There is the choke. Looks like 606825. Yep, so it's right around the same time. Within 3 weeks, 25th week. Moving over here to the output transformer. 6068. F057, is that right? So that's got to be, that's a code I haven't seen before. I've seen it with the dashes in front of the 6s. I'm not sure what that designation is. You can see right here at the beginning of it, it's got a dash in front of that first 6. But that's a 68. And it's been in place for a while. And then here are our caps. And then down there, we got our Reverb Transformer. And let me see what that says. 6068. So yeah, this one is a 68. The majority of the pot codes are 68 or earlier. So yeah, except for the replaced one, which I was unable to see from the angle that it was installed. But yeah, so this guy's a 68. We're going to do a cap job, obviously. Going to do that with F and T's. We're going to do this vintage style. I'm going to do it non-modded. In other words, I'm not going to put 100 microfarads with bridging caps right here. Talked it over with the owner, and the owner wants it to kind of stay vintage. So, and again, here's a screw with some corrosion on it. That needs to be dealt with. It looks like it's eaten away some insulation from one of these wires. I may see some wire replacement in my future here as well. This wire is plastic coated. This is still cloth. I'm not sure if that's original or it was replaced during the first round of repairs, but yeah. And then these two resistors will go away. This one, you can't even read the code on it anymore. It's been worked so hard, probably partially as a result of these caps starting to leak some. So, yeah, that's what we got going on back here. Transformers are original. Everything looks good. We're going to do a cap job and proceed as normal with this amplifier. Stay tuned. All right, we are rocking on down the road, so to speak, with this 68 Deluxe Reverb here. We got the caps in, the new caps, new F&T caps. We're looking at the positive side of these caps here. And you can see that I have completed the work here. Nice clean solder joints. Did not have to replace the wire I thought I was going to have to replace. Most of what was in there in terms of what I thought was insulation rotting off wires, that was all dried out innards from the original caps in this amplifier that should have been cleaned out the last time and wasn't. So the wires were all intact. I cleaned them all up and everything looked good. One thing I did do, if you look here on the main first node, this wire used to meet up over here. And it was kind of nasty and didn't... I wanted to get a new end on it and attach it. But there is a jumper underneath here. If we look at the schematic, and I've got it up here, I can back off and get up there and hopefully zoom in on it. You can see right there, there are those two caps that were originally 16 microfarad at 450 volt, and now we've got 22 at 500. Now, one of the things I like to do is to put 100s at 350 in there, which still gives you what you need capacitance and voltage wise for the amplifier. 700 volts there is still a ton. But then I also like to bypass each cap with a 220K resistor, similar to what you're going to see on Twins and Supers and the vast majority of the other larger 2 power tube amplifiers. So what you can see there is that the positive ends are connected together. And it really doesn't matter how they're connected together as long as they're connected together. So, like I said, originally, this wire right here, this brown wire, was formerly hooked up right here at this point. And there is still a jumper that runs between these two on the underside. So what I did was I just moved it over here. And this is typically where you're going to find it on most other Fenders. I have not seen it much over here. It's usually right there, but on this amp it was run here. So I clipped a little bit of the nasty end portion and connected it there. Like I said, all of these are 22 UF at 500 volts. We've got brand new bypass or bridging resistors here, 10K each one. And let's go back up here to the schematic again to refer to. Always work off a schematic, kids. If you try and work off a wiring diagram, you won't always be able to troubleshoot properly or understand what it is that you're doing. We can see right there, that TR2, that's the choke. Comes right off the standby switch from the first node that we just talked about. That pair of caps down there. That's on the other side of the standby switch. That's the first node because it's coming right off the power. Then the second node goes from the choke through to those other 3 nodes of filter caps right there. And there's a 10K bridging resistor between each. So that's where these guys are in the circuit path, these 2 10K resistors right there that should have been replaced last time. This one at the second node, which is the first one beyond the first node, be second, third here. This one was so had seen so much heat I couldn't read the bands on it anymore, and it was reading about 6K, so it was way off of where it should have been. But now we've got these nice 3-watt metal oxides here, and those will tolerate what's going to become of them over the next number of years. Hopefully they'll outlive me. So there you go. That's all for the filter supply. And now we're going to move on to the innards. All right, top side work is completed. And you can see right there, that was your former 2525 at 25 volt, the double right here. That is on the right, the normal channel first preamp cathode resistor and capacitor. And on the left, vibrato channel first preamp cathode resistor and capacitor. 25 UF, 25 volt, bypassing a 1.5K resistor on both sides. Went with carbon films right there, which are my preference in those positions. Now we move down here to this one. Same thing. On the right, we have, let's see, that is the reverb driver cathode resistor and capacitor. And the one on the left is the normal channel and vibrato channel second preamp cathode resistor and capacitor. And right up here is the reverb driver grid resistor, is this 1 meg up here. I left that one in place. It was slightly drifted, but it was okay. As we move across here, we see another pair of these guys. This one on the right is the reverb recovery cathode and resistor. And the one on the left is one of 2 vibrato cathode resistors and capacitors rather. And the other one is down further, and we'll get to that in a second. I've replaced this resistor up here, this 220K, which is the reverb recovery grid resistor. It had drifted to like 140K, and it's supposed to be 220. That's enough to make a real difference in the sound of the reverb, so I went with that replacement there, that carbon film you can see right up there, this 220K. So you can see an awful lot of replaced stuff in here. I have a feeling that the bug has been replaced, and there's some questionable solder joints, although the resistors all test good. So I'm leaving stuff in place until I actually hear the amplifier, and then I'll start probably looking further. But if it works, I'm going to leave it. This right here, this little arrangement, that was originally a 25 UF bypassing 100K, and I always replace those. That's one of the vibrato cathode resistors and capacitors. I like to step that up to 50 volts from the original 25. And I think this joint here had been messed with, I think, because this 47 ohm resistor had just been tack soldered to the top of this. It was not properly down in the eyelet, so I fixed that. Let's see here. As to the front end, we're going to have to flip this around so you can see the other side of it, back where the power tubes and power cable are, etc. Let's get a little more light here. You can see up in there where the bias supply board is. And we have replaced that capacitor with an F&T 100 at 100 volt, which is pretty much my standard for vintage Fenders. It's enough for just about any of them. Twins, Supers, you know, Deluxes, Princetons, whatever. I just use them in all of those. Okay, well, I guess we can see the power tube sockets here. There you go. These are your screen grid resistors right here. 5 watt, 500 ohm. And then we have 1.5K grid stoppers tucked in underneath on each one of these. And we're not going to be able to see the power cord, so I'm going to flip it around. Stand by. Alright, there's a view of the power tube sockets from the other side, facing from the other side of the chassis. You'll note that the death cap is gone, and the polarity switch has had all its wires removed, and I've wired around it. The courtesy outlet is not included in the circuit. I just do that. It's a bad idea. Others think it is a good idea. I just don't agree. I think there are better ways for you to obtain auxiliary power for whatever else you need to. And it's not grounded anyway. You'd have to put a grounded outlet in there for it to be useful. You can see where I have grounded the main AC. I used a Dremel tool on the chassis to clean it up really nice, and then I followed that up with some isopropyl alcohol and make that chassis really clean. And then you really tighten that thing down there. You want that ground connection to be really, really solid. And again, as on other amps that I've done here recently, I like to leave this top eyelet free, because you very easily can clamp on your ground probe from your volt-ohm meter. It makes a nice little grab to measure the ground directly. You can measure ground from a lot of places, but I like to go to the source. There's your rectifier tube socket. Didn't do anything to that. Everything looks good. A lot of this was just maintenance, cleanup, that sort of thing. I have not listened to the amp yet. Have not charged the caps yet. So this is just the end of the first wave of work. And let's zoom in on these. On one set of these from the other side, you can see the work there. That would be this right here. And there's that 220K that I replaced. So all it leaves now is for it to be loaded up with tubes. And we'll charge up the electrolytic filter caps. Stand by. Okay, we're all complete here. Let me get the mic over here where you can hear me. We're all done here. 68 drip edge deluxe reverb. Caps have been charged. Cleaned everything. Pots, tube sockets, everything. Quick review, I did not replace the Tremolo Jack on the back. It had been enlarged. That hole had been enlarged quite a bit. I'm thinking it may have even had a pot in it at one point, but the proper jack will not mount in there properly and securely. So we're leaving that the way it is. It actually allows you to use a 1/4 inch stereo plug style modern foot switch in place of the old school one. You just plug it into that, and it controls both reverb and tremolo from that, the way that the reissues do. So it's been made over like a reissue. But here we go. There it is. It's all cleaned and primed and ready to roll. I've listened to it. That bright cap on the normal channel, if you'll cast your mind back, there was a bright cap. And that thing was unbelievably bright. with those values in the tone stack, I actually like it. It makes it tougher and thicker and a little contrast to the other channel. So I left it alone. I did take that bright cap off. I lifted one leg of the bright cap because it was just too much. You couldn't control it. With the treble all the way off, it was still incredibly trebly. So I clipped that thing out of there, but left it in place. I just lifted one leg. If the owner should decide that he liked it better the other way, we can easily put it back. But it was unusably bright with that in conjunction with that big cap it's got on the board for treble now. So I like it the way it is. The two channels sound quite different. The vibrato channel is pretty much the way, it came from the factory. It's all those values they're changed. Some of the caps there in the tone stack, etc., have been changed, but the values are correct. So left them alone. Sounds really good. Reverb sounds good. Tremolo works. Everything's dialed in. So that is the tail end of this final section of the Deluxapalooza. I hope you've enjoyed it. We've covered all three of the main Deluxe Reverb eras, which would be, the earlier one obviously being the blackface, which we covered earlier, and then the later one being the 73, and this is in the middle of them at 68. So this is the transitional period. And then after that, they kind of get into ultralinear and other things, which can be fine amps. But these are the three main periods to me. Your early blackface Deluxe Reverb, and your drip edge, which lasted a year and a half maybe, and then on into the early silvers. So this kind of wraps that up. All that remains here is to do a little sound play test, which I will do. I'm going to make that separate so that you don't have to wade through all of this stuff. If you just want to hear the amplifier, I'm going to make that video separate. So that's all I've got for this clip, this section here. Hope you've enjoyed it. The 1968 Fender Deluxe Reverb amplifier. If you have any questions about anything we do here at Granville Guitars, seek us out on the web. That's www.granvilleguitars.com. We're also on Facebook and Instagram, and the blog is over at WordPress, A View from the Granville Bench. Go take a look at it. That's all I got for right now on this Deluxe Reverb amp. Look for the playtest demo. And that's it. Have a good day. Be good to one another.